Hi, and welcome to the debrief. I'm Donna King, Carolina Journal's editor. Thanks for joining us. This is your weekly recap of everything happening with state politics and public policy. We have just 5 months to go before the November election. So we're going to give you the latest poll numbers, where everybody stands right now. Plus, what would you think about some constitutional amendments on your ballot this November? Breaking all of it down for us, we have CJ's deputy editor, Jeff Moore, with some details on that. Plus, we have Dallas Woodhouse of American Majority North Carolina, two big experts, lots of information to cover. Dallas, let's start with you. You really can give us a good lay of the land. You have a great story up on carolinajournal.com with the latest numbers. It looks like Trump may be really pulling away from President Biden here in North Carolina.
Well, what's interesting is, we talk about a week in politics can be a lifetime. But what is interesting is that over the last 17 months.
Okay.
It was one of our polls at the John Locke Foundation in March of 23.
Right.
Was the last poll that had Biden in the lead in North Carolina. His real clear, Mr. Trump's real clear politics average is about 5 points, and it has not moved very much in a year. And this race has been very stable. I think there's conflicting information if you look across the country about whether the criminal conviction hurt Trump, helped him, or
Sure.
didn't make a difference. But in North Carolina, it has been a steady race. And, if the election were held today, Donald Trump would win. Now, we've got another story
Sure.
that talks about, both the governor's candidates have ads running on their behalf by other groups. It's some of the earliest spending we've seen in a non-incumbent governor's race, at least on the Republican side, because they have often been, outspent tremendously. I mean, it is interesting that, Roy Cooper outspent Dan Forrest in 2020, 5 or 6 to 1.
Wow.
It was a really massive fundraising differential. Josh Stein will outspend Mark Robinson, but right now it looks like it's going to be closer to 2 to 1.
Okay.
Which is about where, then incumbent Governor Pat McCrory and Attorney General Roy Cooper were.
That was a close race.
Yeah, that was 0.1%, 10,000
Sure.
votes. So, and that's a little different. You had an incumbent governor,
Right.
but. And that race is going to be close to the end. It is the hottest governor's race in the country by far. It will be the costliest in the country by far, and it will be the closest.
Sure. Now, Lieutenant Governor Robinson has really closely aligned himself with the Trump campaign. Trump has endorsed him repeatedly, had him at these events. You think this is giving him a boost? But Robinson has a really loyal following when you see him out on the campaign trail.
He does. And again, to me, nothing has changed in the last number of months. I still think this: if there are, in the past, there have been, going back decades, a certain amount of people
Sure.
who like to vote for Republicans for president and vote for Democrat governors. Yeah. That number was.
That's a North Carolina thing.
It is.
What is that?
So Donna, I go back to this. I think at the end of the day, if Biden closes the margin and makes it a 2-point race in North Carolina, I'm very dubious that Biden can win North Carolina. I know they're putting a lot of effort in it. It's just, I'm not seeing it right now. But if he wins it by a couple of points, he makes it that close, I think it's going to be very difficult for a lot of Republicans down the ballot to win. But I think if Trump gets that margin up to basically the 5 points that the polling average shows, I think Mark Robinson and Dan Bishop and a number of Republican Council of State members have a pretty good shot. But the likelihood is both parties are going to, win some of those races.
Sure. Jeff, what are your thoughts? Do you think this is a wave for Republicans? I mean, it seems to be coming right down to the wire even now, 5 months out.
Yeah, the consistency seems to be the most striking thing to me from week to week because so much can change. And we often have polls that are floating all around and we remind ourselves it's only June, it's only July, it's only August.
Right.
But when it's this consistent, 2 polls make a trend, but in politics, maybe you need a few more.
Sure.
It seems to be a lot supporting that basic margin that we're seeing.
Right.
So as Trump's brand hasn't really evolved, but he's developed this kind of patina through the years. Now that we've been more familiar with him and they're throwing everything at him with the court cases and convictions, I think he's maybe evolving into kind of a new form of Trump here that has that support.
Third-party candidate might be a wild card in this?
Yeah, I think so. And no one seems to be able to pin down exactly which way it's going to affect more, and whether it's going to hurt Republicans or Democrats, but there are some trends there, too.
Although I think in North Carolina, the polls have consistently showed that if Robert F. Kennedy were on the ballot, it would likely hurt Joe Biden more. The SPRY poll showed that, other things. I'm pretty sure that the Democrat-controlled state board of elections, if they thought Robert F. Kennedy were more likely to hurt Trump, his butt would already have ballot access right now. So we'll see how that works out. I hope they don't play any games there. You know, the polls are all over the map in the governor's race.
Right.
But what's interesting is I think Mark Robinson may end up being the most well-funded Republican governor candidate ever, maybe even in the McCrory reelect, which he narrowly lost. We'll see. Now, Josh Stein's still going to outspend him, but it's not going to be the 5-1 that incumbent governor Democrat Roy Cooper outspent the then Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest. So that's just going to be very, very competitive. A lot of eyes on North Carolina.
How important is getting absentee ballots, early voting, capitalizing on that trend?
It's very important. As you know, beside my part-time role here writing columns for Carolina Journal, my full-time job is working with American Majority and American Majority Action. And we've launched a website that encourages conservatives to safely cast their votes by mail. It's securevoternc.com, securevoternc.com. And really the idea is that Republicans have always been a little more suspect of early voting. But it was actually, if you go back over 20 years ago, when the Democrats the first sort of expansion of how we did voting was allowing people to vote by mail with no excuse. And Republicans quickly made use of that and outvoted Democrats by mail, you know, for nearly 2 decades, and that reversed itself during COVID in 2020. And Republicans were getting more and more used to voting early in person or voting early in some way, and getting a little more comfortable with it. And then they sort of backslid in 2020. And the reason it's important, if you are a conservative and you like to vote on Election Day, I would just say that it does help conservative candidates for you to have already voted, because then you're marked off the list, and they're not sending mail to you, and they're not trying to knock your door.
Cost of running a campaign.
It's a cost of efficiency. And it just, and you know, of course, President Trump and the RNC have similar programs, and I think those things are important.
Sure. Now, issues. You've done a lot of coverage on issues. Immigration, inflation, they still seem to be right at the top of most people's priorities, but you know, they may not be bubbling up in messaging. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the inflation issue is stuck around for a while, and it's sticky inflation, and that's something people are seeing every day, so you're seeing it percolate up. As far as one of those top issues, immigration is going to be there. Even in the states that are so far from the border, we see these issues, and we're going to have some of that come in the form of some ballot initiatives, perhaps, when we get to the general election time. So the economy is always going to be kind of front and center on the minds of people that have to buy things in order to live and to earn that money. And so they're going to be interested in how those things go. And it looks like in the generic ballots and on some of these key issues that Republicans are holding slight margins there, just like they did in 2022. Some of that translated into victories, some of it does not. So it's really a matter of what voters are focused on most when they're getting into that voting booth in November.
Interesting thing about the presidential race, there'll be billions of dollars spent on advertising across this country, and whose minds are going to change? You know, I mean, everybody knows these two candidates. You know, we haven't seen anything like this. I mean, Grover Cleveland, of course, did that in the late 1800s, but we didn't have television, we didn't have radio. People weren't as exposed as they are today. And it's just hard to see what kind of seismic events shake up this race. Are the debates going to matter that much? I mean, I don't think if Joe Biden goes up there and he debates fine, I don't think that changes the situation anymore. We expect our presidents to do that. the conventions don't usually change many people's minds, and it's just hard for me to see how this thing changes a lot from here on.
Right. Well, any improvement in the economy has got to help Biden. But I'm also hearing lots of rumors. Could they switch him out for Gavin Newsom or something like that? That seems to be the latest theory.
Yeah, I think that ship has sailed.
Okay.
I think the way the national committees work and everything, they are dedicated to re-election of their own president, and unless that president is no longer alive or no longer wants to run, they're kind of stuck with him.
All right.
And I'm not sure, quite frankly, that just plopping in somebody else would improve their situation. A better economy might. It also may be that we get up to the election and there's a certain amount of people in the country that just go, I don't want to return to Mr. Trump. And what they're saying now may not reflect what they think when they go to the booth, But I'm a little dubious of that. I just think that people are probably hardened and have a pretty good idea what they're going to do.
Yeah. Well, some of these big issues we've been talking about a lot, state lawmakers, maybe putting them on our ballot for November. Tell me about what we have in these proposals.
Yeah, so we've got the Senate proposing 3 constitutional amendments to go on the ballot.
North Carolina Senate,
So for the North Carolina Senate to float these amendments for the Constitution for the voters to approve or disapprove of. One being a voter ID for absentee ballots, so photo ID for voters for all forms of voting, not just in person. Another being a cap on the state income tax at 5%. The leaders in the Senate there.
Good news for Locke.
They're saying we've worked really hard to get these tax rates down. We need to kind of lock in this progress for the people of North Carolina so that they can't go above the 5%.
It's worth knowing that the current cap is 7%.
Yes.
Okay.
So it would lower it even further.
But if we made that change, there would not be a tax cut for people in North Carolina because we are already under 5%.
Okay.
Correct.
So that just means if the party switched.
Yeah.
Well, or
control switched or something.
Or just some other group of legislators at some time cannot go above the 5% mark on state income tax.
So that's like a ratchet. As taxes go down, it's kind of ratcheting down and keeping a ceiling on where future legislators could raise it so that they won't have to face that risk. And then finally, citizen-only voting being added to the Constitution. The Constitution does treat this issue, but it's not exactly explicit in its phrasing of preventing that it is a citizen-only kind of
what does it
voting
need to
privilege.
clarify? Yeah.
And so it needs to clarify some of that language because I think it says that naturally born U.S. citizens, but it doesn't have this only language in there. And because there have been instances across the country of certain judges in courtrooms deciding that there is wiggle room in that interpretation to allow some non-citizen voting, the lawmakers want to get in front of that and make sure that no one tries that lawfare in North Carolina to expand it to non-citizen
Is that popular?
voting.
Is that a popular one?
It looks like all 3 of them are actually around the 7 and 10, about 70% support range.
Oh, wow.
But that one, I believe, the Carolina Journal poll had the citizen-only voting support at around 80+%. So it's really strong support.
That is strong.
It's a pretty common sense
It would draw
measure.
people to the polls,
Well, maybe. I'm a little dubious that any kind of amendment in a presidential year draws people out because who's the people who are interested in amending the state constitution but don't care who the president is?
Right. True.
What's interesting is all 3 of these proposed amendments are in essence technical corrections to parts of the Constitution because all 3 of these issues are addressed in some way in the Constitution already. So it is sort of clarifying rules and procedures. And let's remember that 2 of these amendments, a reduction in the cap on the income tax and photo ID, a different version of those was already placed on the ballot and was passed by the voters pretty significantly. And then the Democrat court, when the Democrats hold the state Supreme Court, they ruled those amendments invalid. It was the first time it's ever happened virtually anywhere in the country where they said you can't pass a constitutional amendment because you came from inappropriate or invalid legislative districts.
Right.
And that is still being litigated. And so one advantage of doing this would be it would make those lawsuits moot is under
Right.
valid districts. So
Would Cooper have to sign this?
no, the governors do not sign constitutional amendments, but
Okay.
they do have to pass by the same margin that you pass a veto, which is 3/5.
Okay, very interesting. All right, that's about all the time we have now for the debrief. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure you check us out on carolinajournal.com for lots more and everything we've talked about, and we'll see you next week.